celebrating 10 years anniversary, and I can say me and Laura, we're celebrating this year 10 years anniversary as well of the Penderyn Distillery. We both joined in 2012. We're both starting the same, and Laura chose looking after a lovely new experience, and I chose looking after all the cask where we're putting new experience. So official title is, as you mentioned, General Manager of Blending and Maturation, but really I've been called different names, and blender, master blender, distiller, brand ambassador, you name it. So really the role, like Laura mentioned, is like we're doing what is need to do in the company, we're jumping in. But of course, my main focus is obviously select the cask and look after all the cask in warehouse, and make sure that production, the bottling line is fully supportive of all the batches, and create existing batches and new creations as well, and all the single cask and so on. And obviously we're working as a team, and of course Lauren and Beth and joining in and tasting, and we all have discussions now and then.
Thank you for having us. We're delighted to be on the call tonight. So as Kim and Julia just explained, my name is Laura. I'm currently the General Manager for distilleries at Penderyn Distillery, which means that my role is to oversee all aspects of distillery production. So we've currently got two functional distillery operations, one in North Wales and one in South Wales. So I oversee the operation side of that, everything from kind of raw material sourcing to technical parameters, making sure that our mashing, our fermentations, our distillations are running as they should do. Health and safety, staff management, recruitment, all that kind of, logistics, all that kind of stuff. I also oversee our visitor centre operations, so everything to do with our visitor experience across both sites, which is nice. It's a bit different, I think, to operations. It gives me a bit of variation in the day. And then I also now and then get to do the fun stuff, which is the brand ambassador work that I'm doing tonight. And I actually get to speak to people and have a chat, so that's always quite fun. When I first joined the industry, I actually had no intention of joining the industry at all. I did a degree in forensic science, and as I was getting to the end of that degree, I thought that I would sort of go into a career doing sort of crime scene investigation, like you see on TV. It would be that kind of thing. But it wasn't to be. There weren't that many jobs in that kind of industry in the UK at the time. And I started kind of looking for anything because I didn't want to kind of leave university and not have a job. So I thought I'll do whatever comes up until my dream job appears in front of me. And if you, as a whiskey distillery, if you put an advert out for somebody to work in a whiskey distillery, everybody, I still will know this, everybody within kind of 20 miles wants to apply, because who wouldn't want to work in a whiskey distillery? So Penderyn put out a really kind of vague advert. It was a PO box address. It was really generic. I think they went out of their way to make the job sound as boring as they could. They deliberately didn't say what the role was. And so I applied for this role thinking, I'll do something until my dream job comes along. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in an interview with the team of directors at Penderyn in this whiskey distillery. And one of the directors says to me, "Do you know anything about whiskey?" And I very kind of innocently and naively said, "Nothing at all." To which they turned to this lovely looking gentleman next to them, who sat very quietly at the table and said, "Well, this is Dr. Jim Swan. He's a world expert in whiskey and maturation. We'll leave you to it for a bit." And everybody left the table. And it was just myself and Dr. Jim Swan. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. But I somehow managed to convince him that I was able to do the job, and I started there. When I joined as a trainee distiller in the same way that Aista did, and our role, I think it's fair to say that when we first joined, the company was an awful lot smaller than it is now, and like Aista was just saying, we were hauled into everything. So one day we'd be manning the phones in the visitor centre, the next day we'd be you know, trying to figure out why the pump on the still wasn't working. And the next day we'd be going through whiskey samples. It was literally doing a little bit of everything. And then as the company grew, I was able to progress into distillery management, and Aista went to manage our warehouse facilities. And then as the company continued to grow, I then sort of stepped into general management, and I now oversee the 2 distillery sites, and I'm working on the 3rd site coming online. So it was never, I guess I never really thought too much about whether I would step into sort of distillery management. It never really occurred to me, particularly because when I first joined the company, that role didn't even really exist. The company was far too small for that. In the last kind of probably 7 years, I guess, we've quadrupled our distillery operations. And so that was kind of a natural evolution that came with that. And I consider myself really, really lucky to have joined right at the right at the time when that became a possibility, really. The Penderyn as a company was founded in the year 2000. 1999, they first started distilling in the year 2000, and the brand Penderyn was launched with saleable bottles on St. David's Day 2004. So the company's been going for about 22 years now. When I first joined the company, we had one still. I think it's fair to say that prior to us joining the company, we didn't really have, well, prior to 2008, there wasn't really a visitor centre. If you look back at kind of photographs from that time, it looks a bit grim. It was very much a functional distillery. It was in no way the pretty distillery that you see now. And so for the first kind of 8 years, everything was thrown at production and getting things, getting the brand launched, getting production going, getting enough stock into casks in the warehouse to allow for kind of future progression. In 2008, then the management team decided that they really needed to open up a visitor centre at the distillery if we were going to sort of make customers and consumers across the UK and across the world aware of our brand. And that's been so important for us. We currently welcome about 40,000 visitors per year into our visitor centre at Penderyn in the Brecon Beacons. And with hopes to welcome probably about 50,000 this year into our site in Llandudno in North Wales. That just gives us a huge reach to customers, and everybody that comes into our shop. Our aim is for them to leave as a brand ambassador for Penderyn. We hope that everybody that comes into our visitor centre, that comes for a tour, will leave telling people what a great time they had and how much they love the brand. When I first joined the company, we were producing around 90,000 litres of pure alcohol per year, which at the time sounded a huge amount. And certainly to Aista and myself, when we were seeing the casks being filled and we were producing it, it probably felt like an awful lot. And then I distinctly remember that when we first joined the company, Aista and I were sitting around a table in a management meeting, and people started talking about, oh, we want to bring on new distilleries in North Wales and Swansea. And I remember thinking, that's never going to happen. That's a bit of a dream. And lo and behold, a year later, we were starting on the first phase of a 2-phase expansion at our South Wales site. That allowed us to quadruple production capacity up to 400,000 litres of alcohol per year. That's where we are now. In May last year, we opened up our site in Llandudno. It's a fully operational site. It's got the capacity to produce up to about 100,000 litres of pure alcohol per year. And then the site in Swansea in South Wales, which will hopefully open by the end of this year, will allow us to produce another probably 400,000 litres of pure alcohol. So the company has grown phenomenally from where it was in the first days. And the one thing that always kind of makes me smile is that one of the founders, Alan Evans, who is sadly not with us anymore, but a really lovely man, he owned a pub which is just down the road from the distillery. And as all the best ideas do, the idea of Penderyn and a Welsh whisky distillery was thought up around the table after a few beers in a pub late at night. And I think, had it not been for the characters of the people around that table, it probably would have been one of those conversations that you have after a few drinks that never really goes any further. But the people around that table were so determined, and so I still agree they were completely unique characters. they just had such determination and such passion for making that happen. And so they literally started, I think the next day they went out kind of looking for a stall, looking for their, you know, where can we put this distillery? Where can we, oh, well, I know a building around the corner and it's got a good water source, all that kind of stuff. And it just went from there, just snowballed from there. And so where we are today, looking at our distillery in North Wales, our distillery in South Wales, going into the warehouse and looking at what is Aista, something like, what, 16,000 casks or something? You know,
Yeah.
you look at that and you think, actually, that all came about because a couple of people were sat around the table one night complaining about the fact that you could buy Welsh beer, but you couldn't buy Welsh whiskey. And that for me just blows my mind every time. And I think that's completely true what Ace is saying. The designs that you see on our bottles are really lovely. And for anybody who's followed the brand for quite a few years, you'll know that we had a rebrand maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. And all of the designs that you see were done by a very talented man called Glenn Tutzel, who has worked on various kind of really high profile marketing sort of branding campaigns across the world. Glenn is sadly no longer with us, but he was on board right from kind of the fairly early days. And it's no lie to say that we probably could never have afforded Glenn at his normal rate. You know, he was way too big for us, really. He was so phenomenally talented. But he was a local guy. He was from Barry, although he'd moved away. Barry is a village, a town maybe 45 minutes from the distillery. But he was so hooked on Penderyn, so hooked on the idea of working for a Welsh brand and helping to make it big, that he put everything into it. And he was like, I'm going to work with you, whatever. And up until the day he sadly passed away, he just put everything into what he does. And it's exactly like Aista was saying, every person that we've had the luck to meet throughout the business just completely believes in it wholeheartedly. So Penderyn was the first commercial whiskey distillery in Wales for about 100 years when we started. I'm sure that so the last kind of Welsh distillery had closed in the early 1900s. It depends who you listen to and which sort of folk story you listen to, but largely because of the temperance movement at the time, you were seen to sort of be doing sort of witchcraft if you were producing alcohol and spirits. So it had to be done kind of under the cover of darkness, and it just became very, very popular with very unpopular with sort of religious movements and stuff. So the whiskey production kind of died out then. I'm sure that in between that distillery in Ffrongoch in North Wales closing and our distillery opening, I'm fairly certain that people were making it in their sheds or something. But Penderyn was the first kind of commercial whiskey distillery in Wales for 100 years. Every nation, if you speak to the Irish, the Scots, everybody wants to claim that they were the nation that produced whiskey first. You know, everybody will claim that they were doing it thousands of years before anybody else. We do have a history in Wales of people making whiskey or variations of whiskey, you know, hundreds of years ago, a couple of thousand years ago. I'm not sure how far back we can claim that, but we certainly have a history of it in Wales, and certainly we certainly have a history of spirits production. Yeah. In terms of other distilleries in Wales, I think it's probably fair to say that we are the biggest producer and probably the most well known, but there are distilleries springing up everywhere now in Wales. I can think of a couple off the top of my head, and I think that's great. I think that's really great, and we don't kind of have an issue with that. The Scotch whisky industry is worth such a huge amount to Scotland, and it would be great if we can kind of replicate that in Wales. We're a long way off, I think, but it would be certainly great if we can make the industry a bigger deal in Wales than it currently is. Our only kind of wish for that is that Welsh whisky, whoever is making it, is made to the best possible standard, and that Welsh whisky continues to be known as being a premium product, as being a really high quality, really great product, not sort of something that everybody is churning out. Stephen, our chief executive, is currently working on a geographical indicator, so a protected kind of status for Welsh whisky, with some others in the Welsh whisky industry. In the same way as Scotch whisky will, has a protected kind of name to it. It will allow us to produce whisky in Wales to a kind of a definition, and will improve quality and sort of maintain quality, that no matter how many people come into the industry and no matter how many distilleries start, they will have to, in order to call that product Welsh whisky, they will have to distill and produce and mature and bottle their product to certain high standards. So that I think is really, really important to us as the industry grows in Wales. So that is something that we can kind of really work. Just that I think what's interesting for us with the Legend is that our kind of signature style at Penderyn is a Madeira finish whisky, which is something that's fairly unique in the industry. I think other distilleries have perhaps done single casks or limited edition bottlings with a Madeira finish, but as far as I know, we're the only kind of distillery that has a full, where our main kind of core range is a Madeira finish whisky. Obviously we use that for our gold range, but also our dragon range. And I think that really sets us apart, and that was Dr. Jim Swan's legacy. That was his decision, and that's, as Aista was saying earlier, that's the legacy that we've carried on, and something that's worked really, really well for us. At every stage of the process, we focus on quality, right from kind of raw material sourcing right through to kind of bottling. And certainly at the fermentation stage, we've done quite a lot of trials on fermentation length and fermentation profile and temperature, and also yeast. We use 2 yeasts at Penderyn, so in what balance we use those yeast, and at what point we pitch them, and that kind of stuff, to make sure that we get not only the optimum yield but the optimum fruit quality in the spirit. And then we put those, that wash, once it's fermented, through our Faraday cells that Aista was mentioning, and that Chris kindly showed a diagram of. And those are fairly unique in the industry, I think. And as Aista alluded to, they allow us to draw off our spirit at around, I think it's 184 proof that we start off to, and go down to 178 proof, the cut point. So we've got a really, really narrow band at which we take our product cut, which is really important to us, because it allows us, through that plate system that we've got in our still. I'll let you go and browse it in your own time, because you can get lost and read up about it. But that allows us to draw off a really high strength, really fruity spirit. And like I was saying, you get so much tropical fruit in that spirit before it even goes into the cask, that once it's in the cask can only kind of build on that and develop that further. So I think the answer to that is that we very firmly stick with what Jim told us, to the point where we've got people who've come into the team and into the business after Jim had passed, who I think I can sense them roll their eyes sometimes when I'm like, no, Jim wouldn't have done that, or Jim always said that we should do this. And I can sort of sense that eye roll, and somebody said to me last week, yeah, but he's not here anymore. And I say, yeah, but it worked. He knew what he was doing. We trust him. And Aista and I say to each other sometimes, if we've got an operational problem, Jim taught us really well. We know what to do. We know how to deal with it. But we'll quite often sit there and go, what would Jim do? What I wish we could pick up the phone and ask him, what would he tell us to do right now? And still now I look back on my emails sometimes and I think, right, when we had this problem before, what did I talk to Jim about, and what did he tell me? And I'll look back and whatever he advised me to do right then, I'll do exactly the same this time, because I know it works. I know that he knew what he was doing. So yeah, in answer to that, I think we very definitely stick to what he told us. One of the things that still makes me laugh, and I think I still will agree with this, is that obviously everybody has different experiences growing up and different kind of cultures, and the way that you sort of perceive aromas and smells is very much dependent on what experiences you've had previously. And I remember in the early days, and we used to sit down and do our sessions with Dr. Swan, and he would come out with, oh right, that aroma is this, and I would go, what's that? like, we've got no idea. And it would turn out to be some really random thing from the 70s that was, you know, stopped production way before we were born, and that kind of stuff. And so we would then like run out and think, right, how do we, let's look it up online, let's figure out like what this used to smell like. And you just realize how unique kind of sensory perception is. And that's something that you really have to kind of work with and have to develop. And even now we'll sit in tasting sessions with the management team and stuff, and we'll say, oh, you know, you've got this aroma or you've got that aroma, and people just throw random comments out. But one of the really nice things about it is that nothing is wrong. You know, people will throw in a comment, oh, this smells like my grandmother's garden, but it's right to that person because it has to link to something that you know and that you can identify. Just to see how we can keep developing. We are big hoarders at Penderyn, and I've got a cupboard in my office with new make spirit from several years ago, from when Aista and I first joined the company. And you think, you know, when you assess it every day, you think that it's not changing very much, but it's only when you kind of take a stop and you go back and you look at today's production compared to production like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, that actually you realize it's come along quite a rapid kind of change. And so seeing, you know, it was very good spirit then and it's very good spirit now, but seeing where we might be in another 5 years, and seeing as well what we can do when we've got spirit from 3 different distilleries, that is really exciting for me. It was nice to hear you call us young women, because certainly I've got 2 small children, and after today I definitely don't feel young. But I think we've brought a couple of years ago we brought Bethan, our colleague, along, kind of following in our footsteps, and we've trained her up, and she's actually just commissioned the North Wales distillery. So that's great that she's come along so far in such a short space of time. But we do have to be very mindful of the fact that we won't be here forever. The company is growing. We've got, you know, more and more operations coming on board. So we do look to recruit. Wherever we can, we kind of recruit internally. And we're really fortunate at Penderyn in that we don't have a lot of people leave the company. When you're in, you're in. You tend to be stuck there for life. So everybody that kind of works with us, in the same way as we were saying earlier, that when we first started, you know, 1 minute you're answering the phone in the visitor centre, the next you're working in operations. We try to give everybody in the business a good kind of all-rounded experience. So at any one time, we'll have people who know a lot of the process, and so there's always talent in the business. But yeah, that is something that we have to think about at the moment, especially with the new distillery opening up at the end of the year. Obviously, we need to put together a team to kind of run that distillery.